Hello. Excellent. If there are people in the audience who already know my content, you know that we always have technical difficulties. Anyways, well, today I will give a talk about a very nice topic, which is fungi, which I love very much. So this is the topic today. Fungi and their relationship with the forests and a bit more. And why a bit more? Well, because when we start talking about fungi, well, we talk about fungi broadly as this diverse group of macroscopic and microscopic organisms that we classify in their own kingdom. For the longest time, they were classified as, as plants within botany until just recently. Just last week, I was looking into a book, uh, a botany book in the university from the 80s, in which fungi are talked about as plants, which, come on. So we need to have it clear and understand that fungi are their very own kind of organisms and have their own way of organizing. There are estimated, although we are not certain for sure how many fungi species there are. We haven't yet studied all of them. It's a group that hasn't been very well studied, but we assume that the number of species that exist are probably about 5 million. These 5 million species are organized in 12 phyla, and of those, we have 12 orders. I suppose that since you are students of biology, you already know what these levels of organization are, but if you don't know, you should go ask your systematics professors, because this is something that you need to know well. These are subcategories in which we place these groups in order to understand how they are organized according to the characteristics that have with one another. The main groups that we can find within the fungi are Dicaria, which has the most well-studied fungi in Ascomycota, Basidiomycota, and more recently a new group, Entorrhizomycota. In the same way, we have the second group, Chytridiomyceta, which includes these three names that I will not stop to read because I will have trouble with it. Monoblepharodomycota. We have these two main groups, Icaria and Citridomyceta, which are subphyla, subkingdoms actually, in which we're going to have all these groups, these other groups. Then we have Mucoromycota, Sopagomycota, Sopagomycota, then Blastocladiomycota, and Opistosporidia. This last one is a paraphyletic group, meaning that we don't know if the relationships in the organisms within this group are actually monophyletic, meaning that they have an ancestor and descendant relationship that is properly structured, and that's why we keep that with an asterisk. Fungi have several different kinds of feeding. It can be organic matter from other organisms. They are not like plants that generate their own food. In this case, the feeding of plants I classified into four main types, which are saprophytes, which feed on organic matter decomposition, parasites. Then we have a fungus that actually damages its host to the point where it might even kill it. Then we have symbiotic fungi, in which there is an exchange of benefits between the fungi and some other organism. And finally, hunter fungi, which find and capture their food. Although most people may think that fungi are static, in truth, they actually have amazing capacities that we will talk about. Now, taking this into account, uh, every time we're talking about fungi, we think about mycorrhizae, since we relate that with plants and trees and ecosystems in general. It's hard not to think about this symbiotic relationship that keeps all of us here. There are symbiotic relationships in which both the fungi and the plant are going to find a benefit. The fungus is going to get to give the plant a better capacity for absorption of nutrients, to tolerate hydric stress and reduce erosion, since fungi will ensure that the tree stays in place and therefore that the tree is able to develop in that area. A tree that does not produce a symbiotic relationship, or in which these relationships are limited with fungi and sometimes with bacteria, it can get deficiencies as far as the quality of the soil, since the tree will not be able to absorb nutrients, mainly minerals from the soil that the fungi helps absorb. These fungi are not only um, related with a single plant, so they are instead related to several plants as far as their mycelium can extend. So we have large extensions of fungi that interconnect with different kinds of plants, like this giant fungus from Oregon, which is a gigantic mycelium that goes from one point to the other extreme of a forest in this place in the US. Now, mycorrhizae can be divided into seven main types, or six depending on the author. It can be ectomycorrhizae, arbuscular, ectoendomycorrhizae, arbutoid, monotropoids, ericoid, and also from orchids, which are also called endophytes. Why did I write orchideas? Someone can please explain? These are going to be related to the type of form in which they join plants. For example, entomycorrhiza are only going to join the plant in its surrounding, but it's not going to go inside the cells of the plant. Now, in arbuscular mycorrhizae, they actually go inside the cells of the plant. And arbutoides, if you think about it, what it might be, this depends on what kind of plant it is uh, attached to. So an arbutoid mycorrhiza is attached to the trees in the family of Arbutoidea. So we have these relationships that are in charge of maintaining the ecosystem. Oh, my neighbors. But these are not the only ones. Usually when we say fungi, forest, and immediately people think about mycorrhizae. But that's not the only thing that you can find in the forest. We also have xylophagus fungi, which are those that are capable of degrading wood. These are capable of using wood as a source of nutrition, since they have the capacity to digest lignin and cellulose from plants, thanks to special enzymes. These fungi can get to be simply saprophytes, meaning they feed on decomposing matter, but others can actually cause problems because they become accidental parasites. It is not very common that this happens because it is not convenient for the plant, but it does happen. So, fungi in these groups, for example, in Echinoderma or in the genus Ganoderma, are not only in charge of degrading organic matter and then making easier the carbon cycle or helping through the carbon cycle, but they also have an impact in what is the feeding of other animals and ourselves, since many of these are edible and sometimes they are considered to be medicinal, or in other cases, they can also be used in industry. Now, well, we have symbiotic fungi, which are usually microscopic and can be found not only in symbiotic relationships with plants, but also with animals. For example, mammal ruminants, or even arthropods like the one we have in the image, which is a beautiful Leuctra bauerii. These small bugs feed on plants, and they have in their mouth apparatus, together with some bacteria, fungi, which help them degrade the cellulose of what they consume. Then this is the fungus that you can see in the image here, Orthella intrepus. Then, imagine the fact of having several fungi living in the jaws of insects that are an important part of the life cycle in a forest or a jungle. Without these fungi that work as a support for these bugs, it would be quite more difficult to maintain the different stages of the carbon cycle and the food that can be produced by these bugs as they are eaten by other organisms in the community and ecosystem and so on. Now, well, we have predatory fungi. Usually, when we think about fungi, we don't think about them moving. We mainly think about like mushrooms, like in soup, like edible mushrooms, like Ganoderma, for example, or Penicillium. All these fungi that we already know and that are part of our daily lives. But usually we think about fungi as static organisms that are all they do is grow. But that is somewhat not the reality of what a fungus is. Well, then imagine that these fungi are capable of capturing, killing, and feeding on, well, this small prey. So the better known cases are fungi that feed on nematodes, nematophagous fungi. And there are these fungi that you can see in this image. You can see the hyphae of the fungus, which they can produce a ring in which they will end up hunting their prey. Something really interesting is that even if we can't believe it, these fungi have a very curious way of attracting their prey, which are nematodes. These are small worms, unsegmented worms from the soil, which are usually microscopic. Nematodes are really important in part of the trophic cycles of the soil, but they can also be pests. For this reason, this fungi can be used as a form of biological control. Now, what does the fungus do? They produce these rings, or sometimes they just have sticky hyphae with which they attract their prey by using different molecules that make them attractive to the nematodes. When the nematode is caught, they cannot get out because the hyphae is specialized for this purpose, and then the fungus starts to secrete enzymes in which they start to digest their prey. The fact that they generated a whole structure in order to be able to hunt a specific group, it shows the capacity that fungi may have um, the capacity they may have for their evolutionary strategies. Now, uh, using the fact that we are right now have been talking so much about that video game and new series, TV series, The Last of Us, we know that there are parasitic fungi that are capable of infecting other organisms and then compromising their survival. So, for example, here we can see in the image the fungus that is mentioned in the game and in the TV series. This is Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, in which a specific kind of fungus, which is Ophiocordyceps, usually they say cordyceps, but that's not right, it's Ophiocordyceps. That is my frustration with all this boom of talking about the TV series. Now, Ophiocordyceps is considered to have been for a really long time in coevolution with the ants that it regularly parasitizes. So it is so specialized that ants that it parasitizes, which are carpenter ants. Anyways, the degree of specialization of this fungus to a particular species, a particular genus, when it infects a different kind of ant, it doesn't get the same efficiency in order to modify the behavior of the individual. It doesn't produce efficiency in dispersal of the spores either. There is a very specific evolution, and we have fossil record of leaf biting in which we can notice the bite of these ants on the leaves of trees, showing that since millions of years ago, Ophiocordyceps fungi have been controlling ants. Now, on the other hand, we have, for example, the cordyceps fungi, especially, or for example, Cordyceps militaris, which parasitizes Hymenopteron larvae and a few other insects. In this case, they don't produce changes in the behavior of the individual because it is really not something that they need in order to be able to reproduce. Coevolution has not been so close with these groups, but it is it has been enough to have a large incidence of infection. As I said, a large incidence of infection of these insects. One thing we need to understand is that this works for biological control in order to maintain the populations at a stable level. Let's say, imagine that all these ants that are usually attacked by Ophiocordyceps, if there was not this fungus parasite, then their populations would be out of control. So it's a way of leveling the population. So this is a kind of natural enemy that levels these fungi, and removing levels the populations of the insects, and removing these links will probably affect the survival of other species given the proliferation of the insects. Now, finally, I would like to say that fungi are anonymous. We might think that we all know fungi, but actually that's not true. So let's go back to the question at the beginning. If we think about the importance of fungi in forests or in ecosystems, we think about mycorrhizae immediately. Actually, there's people who wouldn't be able to describe to you what the importance of fungi is. So, but we can see that in all the trophic relationships and biological relationships inside an ecosystem, we see that fungi are a fundamental part as a source of food, as a source of carbon. They help others survive their environment and make it much easier for them. It gets rid of others. So they are mostly not properly considered, despite all this diversity that they might have for and their value for the ecosystems. It's important that we understand that we wouldn't be around without them, and it's unfair that the study of fungi is so limited to the fact that still, in many cases, we don't have dichotomous keys. We don't have identification keys for fungi. And if we do, many of them are really old. And we have to a lot of work to do to actually update this information and be able to talk about fungi, to learn about their evolutionary history, their systematics, their applications, and so on and so forth. There's so much to do, and I believe that fungi, as we have talked right now, deserve it. Thank you so much. Any questions? Finally, you can see the sources of this talk if you are interested. And that has been it for today. If you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer. Yeah. Now we have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. There's the first question. How is it that fungi control the ants? What do they do inside the ants in order to control them? Yeah, I was able to hear that. I think you guys actually have a talk in a couple days about that. So the guy who's actually talking about this later, he's a PhD. So if I give you a response right now and it's not what he says later, what the doctor says later, you will be like, hey, she knows nothing. But from what I understand so far, but I actually want to see the talk to understand a bit better. It's the way they manipulate them is by modifying the way that the bug perceives things. So it actually cannot get rid of all the tissues of the insect, but it changes the perception of of the ant or other insect so that it will search a specific height, moisture, and temperature conditions. But that's as much as I will be able to say because you'll have an expert here later. Anything you would like to know about Polly? Which is your favorite fungus? The answer by Polly is Lactarius indigo. And then the question, of course, is why? This is actually a really beautiful fungus. There's this video, someone asking what is an edible blue thing, and it's actually this fungus. Lactarius indicus is a blue fungus that is edible. It's a mycorrhiza, and it's come out of the roots or near the roots of oaks, and it actually looks magical when you look at it in the forest floor in between the oak trees. So it's not really magical, but it looks magical. So can you speak a little bit about the evolutionary relationships between ruminants and fungi? So actually, this is funny. Um, in fungi, the way that fungi reproduce, for example, there are fungi which are specialized in decomposing feces. So coprophilous fungi will specialize on feeding on feces, and it's a small, really, really tiny fungi that you would need a dissecting microscope to see them properly. They grow in feces, and they do grow in feces because spores are actually only going to germinate on ruminant feces, not in feces from dogs or very rarely horse in horse feces, but they will do it mostly in the ruminants. And so they're very linked to the diet of the animal in order to be able to grow. So another example would be sometimes of Rusula fungi, which are mycorrhizae. You might have two fungi that are very similar in their morphology, but you wouldn't be able to distinguish one from the other. However, if you look at the incidence of vegetation in that region, then you would notice that one of them, Rusula novis, is linked particularly to pine. The symbiotic relationship is actually with pine. And then you have another one, Rusula emetica, which is a very similar species, is linked to Quercus, which is oaks. Now, why would the same genus grow in the same place, but you could tell them apart just by where they're growing in the vegetation? So there's several fungi like that, or there are also the cases of fungi that feed on poop, on feces. It's much more common that you find, let's say, a coprinus in cow feces, but not in rabbit feces. So they're linked to very different conditions each. Thank you. Thank you so much, Polly. We're just going to ask you if you could turn on your camera for a minute so everyone here will be able to see you. I think the Dr. Juarez is speaking, saying, I think it's great that you are in this, starting this career of being a communicator of science. I think what you do is fantastic. Hey guys, says Polly, you should do it yourselves too. If you feel like, oh, I don't know, I don't know if I can do it, just try. Just go with it. You know. Oh, hi there, you guys in the back. If you really want to be communicators of science or to get into it, just try. What you can provide, it's particular of each person. I can talk about certain things, but there's so many people talking about others on the internet also. And I like to think that uh, you know over time we become more and more because the more people you have, the more there is sound. So we need to keep talking about it. What is out there on the sidewalks of your street, or so that's really nice. Yeah, the more the merrier. Well, now we're ending up inviting everyone to listen to the chapter of the Genoma podcast with Polli Padilla. And now, final applause